Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and we are just days away from the kickoff to our 2022 finals campaign. Our premiership defence starts on Friday night as we begin our quest to go back-to-back for the first time in 62 years. Joining me tonight to preview our upcoming qualifying final against the Sydney Swans is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to all our listeners. If you'll just excuse me for a minute, I'm just polishing the crystal ball just so we can get some insights into this week's game.
Well, I hope you've polished it really well, because
It's been put away since last year, so
I trust that's not a euphemism, George.
I hope not. This is a PC program. Joining us tonight, you just heard him to help us, is Demonland's residence tactician, B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. No, I'm not rubbing any crystal balls. I'm very, very excited about this week. Double header. Friday night, how exciting is that? I'm going to get to the game early, watch the women play. Can't wait for this Friday night. It's, Goody's talked about it, and it feels like it in Melbourne, that finals is a whole different season. And what excites me most is that Goody's, even before we were making finals, obviously, he's talked about building a brand of footy, a way of playing, a method, the Melbourne way, that's about winning finals and not just one lot of finals, but a system and a way of playing that can win multiple finals over multiple years, multiple flags over multiple years. And I think they have done that. They've built something special the way they play it. And I think that, he's sort of working through Richmond's work of the game being significantly different come finals. And I think we're going to see a pretty good view of that in the first week of this final. Actually, Melbourne, Swans and Collingwood coming up against Geelong. We're going to see suddenly those teams hit the finals wall.
We'll talk all about our game in a moment, and we'll talk about some of the other games to come. But before we start, I have a bone to pick with one of our listeners. This program is supposed to be a safe place for Demon fans, a place where like-minded individuals can share their thoughts and feelings about the D's without the fear of their deepest and darkest secrets being snatched and then twisted and taken out of context and then delivered into the hands of mutual friends. A place where we can safely express ourselves without fear of reprisals. And that's right, my comments at the top of the show after the Carlton game were whispered to some of my mates. Now, the actual words themselves weren't uttered, for if they had actually heard what was said, any angst would have been put to bed straight away. And our loyal listener dobbed me in to my mates, describing my words as aggressive towards my mates, who in their grief of sort of facing being unceremoniously dumped from finals contention, it caused a minor stir that I would harbour such horrible feelings for them and their team. So I present you with Exhibit A, and you tell me if this should be considered as aggressive behaviour. And well, if your heart didn't stop in the dying moments of that match, well, then you probably don't have a heart. Personally, Carlton fans have made my footy childhood a living nightmare, so there was truly no better way to defeat them than in the manner that we did. And hopefully that victory helps knock them out of finals contention. Well, I wouldn't call that aggressive, perhaps passive aggressive, but yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks for dobbing me in.
Are you wanting us to respond? I think that was just uncalled for. But I mean, God, no, I assume they're no longer your friends, those poor Carlton buggers, or maybe they're psychologically traumatised by 2 weeks in a row of having victory snatched from the jaws of defeat.
They've got to get used to it. We've all got used to it. We saw exactly that circumstance a couple of years ago. So bad luck, guys. You've got a long way to go yet.
Yeah. How many years since they won a flag, Andy? You must know that straight off the top of your head.
Well, I know it was 1995. My maths off the top of my head isn't great, but it's
right.
been...
You can let your mates know they've got another 30 years before they can even start complaining about the angst of following a unsuccessful footy club.
I'm sure they'll be back there soon enough to annoy me about it. Now, before we start with our preview of our qualifying final match against the Swans, we have a message from our friend in Kongwak, Deemerland poster Kongwacker, and he says, enjoying the podcast, gentlemen. Your efforts are appreciated. Not so much a question, more of a topic of discussion, if I may. Reflecting on this season and how it stacks up against last season, we finished the 2021 home and away season with a percentage of 130.8%. We finished 2022 home and away season with a percentage of 130.5%. Not wanting to get too far ahead of this game, but Friday night against the Swans, a very well-coached and well-drilled team, the opportunity to have a final series like last year's begins, and wouldn't it be great if we matched or went close to our 2021 finals campaign percentage of 213.1, or even better, eclipse Geelong's record of 227.1. We're set up for it. Let's make history. Last year we arrived at finals with almost a full list to choose from. This year similar. We came in with momentum last year, and I believe that momentum is building in a similar way. The team and football department have got us to where we want to be. The opportunity to repeat last year on our home ground in front of MFC members and fans. I wait with great anticipation. That's from Kongwacker. Let's hope we can do that.
It's pretty interesting, isn't it, though, from that perspective? Bin Man just touched on it before. Basically, our season looks very, very much like last season. The preparation all comes from that principle that Goody's been talking about. We build for finals. We build in a certain way, the same as we built last year towards the end of the season, and here we are again. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if you're going to get similar sorts of results out of this team this year. We'll hope for that, surely, but it's all about the preparations and getting the players ready, the fitness staff ready. Everything has got to be focused towards finals, not just home and away, week-to-week games.
And it's interesting because last year we actually came into the finals as favourite. The Cats is everyone's favourite team this year, and it's interesting, sort of, well, not the underdogs, but having Geelong as the team people are tipping. It's a bit of a different feel to last year, but I mean, like I said last week on the show, this year we don't have to travel now. No matter what happens, we don't travel out of the state. We can organise around that. We don't have any of the uncertainty that there was last year in terms of, what the restrictions would be in Perth, having to be in isolation for 2 weeks over there in basically a compound, albeit a pretty nice compound, I'm guessing. So there's a lot of things that you could argue that this year are in better shape than last year. We've only got the one injury, significant injury, and that's Tommy Mack, and he played on the weekend. We'll probably talk about that performance, no doubt. We've got a full list. We're fit. We've had, the other big difference to last year is that we've had a tougher run in, but steel hardens, sharpens steel, and if you compare our run into the Cats, if you put any stock into the idea of being battle hardened and having tough games of footy is a good way to prepare for finals, then we're better prepared than last year, and we're certainly better prepared than the Cats. So a lot of parallels to last season. The numbers are crazy. All of the numbers are crazy. The key statistic areas, the percentages, as was just pointed out by Conwacker, a whole number of other, even the win-loss ratio, remarkable given we've had a much, much harder draw this year. So it's pretty hard to argue that we've performed. It's pretty hard to argue with the proposition we've performed much better this season. So 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, you would never be able to get that argument across the line, certainly not on Demonland.
And big shout out to Kongwacker and the good luck for the Kongwack Inverloch Sea Eagles. Unfortunately, they're just not as good as the Cows Bulldogs with Cam Pedersen leading the race down that way.
It's a blast from the past. Haven't heard Cam Pedersen's name in a while. Was a big fan of his.
He turns up every week and kicks a couple of goals because he's huge.
Yeah. Before we get into our qualifying final preview, if you do want to join the show, you can give us a call on 0390 163 666. That's 0390 163 or you can Skype us, Steamerland31. We'll pick up, we'll have you on mute, we'll bring you on when we get a chance, so just hold on the line. If we're talking to someone else, I can't pick it up, so try and call back a bit later on. Now let's get into our qualifying final preview. We'll start with our defence. We're going to go through the lines and go through some strengths and weaknesses. We've got some questions that we'll mix in, questions from our listeners that we'll mix in along the way. Now, our defence, for the second year running, our defence was the best in the competition, conceding the least amount of points against them. This season, with arguably a harder draw, we only conceded 40 more points than in 2021, and we talk about those parallels from last season. We had 3 less points scored against us than Fremantle and 5 less than the Cats, who had the luxury of playing both the Cellar Dwellers North and the Eagles twice. So before we begin previewing our defence, we have a question from Demo Saw, who asked, who is the best matchup for Buddy? I'll say that we were missing Stephen May last time these two teams met, but they were also missing Buddy. However, when we met at the MCG in 2021, Buddy Franklin was only discovered a few days later crawling out of May's laundry pile, having spent a few cold nights in Stephen May's back pocket. Yes, for me, it's Stephen May. But before I get your take on who's going to man up Buddy, Lazy asked the following. We know about Sydney's small forward threats, but I'm thinking in order for the Swans to win, they will need to find a tall marking presence who can clunk a few. Sam Reid was the man in round 12 with 5 marks and 2 inside 50s. Granted, there was no May last time, but do you guys also feel we need to be wary of this threat? My attitude is that their smalls are going to score on us. That's a fact, but the punch that gets you is often the one you don't see coming, especially in finals. So I'll ask you guys the question, who are our talls going to be manning up on? And then we do have some questions about their smalls, so just keep your answers to their talls at the moment. George?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't put as much faith in Franklin as what other people do. People forget that he's been playing the game for a long time. He is not anywhere near what he used to be. He still can't mark overhead despite 15 years in the system. And as Stephen May will, and it's not just one person who takes Buddy. He will Stephen May will be able to hold him out successfully to allow people like Lever and Petty to come over the top and deny him any opportunities. His big positive is obviously his kicking. He can kick from a long way out, and he's very mobile. But Petty's also very mobile, much more mobile than May. So I think it'll be a combination of things. He won't, Buddy just won't get the freedom that he gets in other games from our defence. Our defence is far too strong for that. So I think Sydney actually play better without Buddy in the side. They become too focused on him. We saw that in the last game when we played against them. Reid suddenly popped up from out of nowhere simply because he had the space available. People weren't prepared for that, but coming into this game, we'll be prepared for it.
Big man, the tools.
Yeah, I mean, Buddy, he's best up the ground, really, isn't he? Up on the wing, I reckon, kicking in, because he's an underrated field kick, I reckon. He's a brilliant field kick, gets great depth off 1 or 2 steps. We've had his measure at least for the last 2 or 3 years, and I expect May will probably take him, or Petty'd be good, and they'll just hand off because they'll want May deep, and if he goes up the ground, they'll hand off, and maybe Petty will go with him up the ground. I think they're probably relying on him less now. I think that was definitely a case last year, George, but it's a bit like Hawks City's last year at Hawks. They're less. I think they've sorted that a little bit. He obviously takes a key defender, and the thing about Franklin as well is he makes sort of the chance out of nothing. So you've got to watch him. But I think that their strength in terms of their talls is down back. With the McCartan brothers. We're the best at stopping opposition teams mark the ball inside their 50. So, and Franklin's included in that. Franklin really is at his best when he's on a lead. He's not a great mark in a pack, and the way that we get back, unless they're moving the ball quickly or they've got a break from the centre clearances, he's not got. He won't get any space to lead into. So you take away his number one strength. Really, is that he's quick off the mark for such a big fella. He needs space to run into. But in a marking contest 1-on-1 or even in a pack situation, he doesn't clunk that many contested marks. So he's not really a threat aerially. I like Logan. It's Logan McDonald, isn't it?
Yeah.
McDonald. I like his skill set, but I reckon that's where, George, where there's been a number of games I've seen or heard called through the year where Logan McDonald's played better without Buddy in the team, because structurally it means, where does McDonald go? He reminds me a little bit of a Wiedemann type, in the sense McDonald's best footy looks like it's leading out of the square to me, and Buddy takes that spot. So therefore, where does he play? He plays sort of like a tall sort of flanker type or pocket. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one about, I'm not sure that you didn't get many Swans think that he's probably, they play better without him, but I see your point. Certainly, I think Logan McDonald won't be horrified to see Buddy go. He'll have more opportunity, won't he?
Mm.
Now, CYB late in our podcast thread said it's going to be wet based on current forecasts, which will make it a ground ball game for sure. I doubt they'll go for a 3-tool setup if that's the case, meaning Logan, Reid and Franklin, but who knows? Well, let's see.
I reckon Reid's an underrated player, and but he goes in and out of the game. He's just too inconsistent, isn't he? He's not. Again, that's one of the beauties about Melbourne's game. The way we play, our method, is that players can have a quiet game on the stat sheet and still contribute to the system and to the overall performance of the team. That's not true of a lot of other teams, and I mean they've really got a good structure as well as Swans. But Reid's the sort of player is, if he's not kicking goals and taking marks, then he's not much value to the team. And goes missing for big. I said that about Cameron last week. If Reid's not clunking those marks, then he's not a liability. But what else does he bring? Because their model isn't running up and down the ground in the way we do, in the way Tommy Mack might, for instance. Having said all that, he was brilliant against us last time, wasn't he? And probably their best forward by far on the day.
So if it is a wet game, it might be a ground ball game. And Watson11 wants to know who will go to Isaac Heaney. Then Demonland posted Denox answered this. He said, could we try an option like Hibberd, because Hibberd plays high and will drag Hibberd to the ball where he can use his kicking to our advantage. Singer followed up on the question of Heaney with, there was a question earlier about who takes Heaney. I'm interested in this too, but also who takes Papley. Both of them have the potential to break the game apart, and we have struggled against Papley in the past. Absolutely love the podcast. Can't get enough. Keep up the good work. Who's getting these guys? We've got Heaney, we've got Papley. Big man?
I don't think they'll send anyone to Heaney. I mean, they'll trust their team defence for Heaney. He is an excellent player. Takes his chances, strong at the ball. He's really important to them from a leadership perspective. He's one of their senior players. He's had a bit of a variable year though. Oh no, he come good at the end in the last third of the season. So Papley, I think. Well, it was interesting. They had Hunt played on him last time, didn't he? I think. But you reckon Hibbo will take him?
Yeah, I think Hibbo would be the obvious ones, given the hatchet job he did on Cameron. I think Papley's well and truly in Hibbo's sights at the moment. Yeah.
And are we going to talk about the Swans' defence on the way through, Andy?
Well, I figure you can talk about that when we talk about our forwards, because one of the questions in the forwards is about talking about Paddy McCartan, sort of. So I guess we'll take their defence. Then when we talk about our defence, we've talked about their forwards. We'll do the reverse as we go through. So I know you've got stuff to say about that. So hold your horses, because at the moment we're going to go straight into our mids, rucks, and wings. Our star-started midfield were once again a staple for the All-Australian team. Max took out his 6th All-Australian. Clayton Oliver and Christian Petrarca took out their 3rd All-Australian nods. Look, Jack Viney, he's had a great year too. Was probably stiff not even to get into the squad. I think he's been fantastic this year. And whilst we're talking about all Australians, congrats as well to Stephen May on his second call up. But I just wanted to get this on record here that Angus Brayshaw, I reckon, was robbed of a spot in that team. He had a much better year than Adam Saad. His stats speak for themselves. He's ranking elite in almost all of his stats, whereas Saad ranked above average in those same stats. Gus averaged 26.1 disposals to Saad's 21.9. Gus 17 kicks to 15.4, 9 handballs to 6.5, 7.4 marks to 4.8, 2.1 tackles to 2.2 tackles, 427 metres gained to a not-so-woofing 403 metres gained. Math does not lie, but we're here to talk about the midfield. But before we get into the midfield, do you think Gus was robbed? He had a fantastic year off half-back. Did we have too many players in the team and they just couldn't give us another one?
I suspect that he would have been a half-back flank All-Australian if they'd kept in that position.
Oh, he played 2 games in the midfield at the end of the year.
Well, no, but he also got taken out and, he played 3, didn't he? 4.
Oh, okay. He played the
4,
majority.
so that's a fifth of the season.
Majority of the year he's played it.
Yeah, well, you can add Fritter into the mix as being a bit unlucky, I reckon. Fritter knocks up kicking goals. And I agree with Brayshaw. It's just, they put Carlton games, but
they put midfielders on
in my view.
They put midfielders on the half-forward flank. Why can't they put a midfielder on the half-back flank, particularly someone who played 3/4 of the year on the half-back line?
Saad's he's overrated. That's probably a touch unfair, but that position, the way he plays that position, we showed the problem with that method of playing when we played them, because he turns and dumps kicks. If you don't have a system like Melbourne do that is set up to win that next ball as well as we do, he's suddenly, not a liability, but his strength is taken away, Saad. But, definitely, getting back to the midfield, Brayshaw has been terrific in the midfield, and I watched the Brisbane first half of the Brisbane game from last year, the qualifying final last night, and Brayshaw, his defensive skill in that game was fantastic. He was playing wing, obviously, but it made me think about his role at the moment, and my thought about it, he's playing like a defensive midfield role, if that makes sense. I don't mean he's tagging anyone, although he put some time into Neil last week. But the way he plays is on the defensive side of the contest. So he's like a sweeper out the back that protects against if we lose the clearance. It's a very similar way of playing, no matter where he's playing, if that makes sense. He plays in a similar fashion as he did when he played on the wing, and he's playing in a similar fashion that he did for this year, playing on the halfback flank. He's been just fantastic, really, in our midfield, and it's provided some real opportunities for Goody to tactically do other things, like Harms in a different position. Maybe Sparrow isn't quite as important in terms of giving the midfield minute chop out. He's been terrific since he's gone into the midfield, and much to my surprise, I was sure that they'd keep him at halfback flank.
Shout out to Sean Baylor on Twitter, who posted those stats of Gus and Saad for the comparison. Before we start analysing the battle in the midfield, CHF has the following to say. As far as I'm concerned, it will be the midfield battle that determines the outcome. Our mids are well schooled in the transition from attack to defence and vice versa. Against Brisbane, we did not look to tag their most effective mids in Neil and McCluggage, etc. We opted to make them accountable by making sure they had attacking players on them. I like that we did that. With a tag, some players have the freedom to attack as they wish without precaution and not be accountable for an opponent. So part of the discussion I want to hear is, do we do as we did against Brisbane and trust in our attacking midfield, or do we tag players from the start? I think we attack from the outset proactively, and if required, look to tag players that are hurting us as a plan B. George, what's your theory on tagging?
I'm not a fan of tagging, and in all honesty, we've got the best midfield in the competition. We've got Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, and then you back them up with Brayshaw and Sparrow and Harms potentially coming in behind them if needed. Sydney have got to worry about us, not the other way around. We saw what happens when these players get on top. Brisbane suffered monumentally as a result of it. We've got the best ruckman in the competition feeding it to them. We've got the best backup ruckman in the competition feeding it to them. And don't forget about the wingers as well. I don't know that Sydney's got anyone who's going to be able to match Langdon. He is back to his best based on what we saw in Brisbane. So I think the problem belongs to the Swans. What are you going to do about stopping all of them? And I've got no doubt, like Brisbane found out, you can't stop the lot of them. So someone's going to get up.
The last time, just on Langdon, before you go, Big Man, last time we played them, Langdon had come back from that rib injury, but I believe he still had the broken ribs and he definitely wasn't.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Big Man.
But with Langdon's role, it's really about have they got a player who can go with him, who can run those. I mean, Mills has been playing a bit of wing and is a really critical player to them. He's so flexible the way they use him, but his ability, Langdon, to get from pocket to pocket essentially is phenomenal at speed. So that's that big concern in terms of following him. In terms of what do you do with him? You can't really tag him. I don't think we will put a huge amount of time into those. We'll obviously put it not a tag. We'll put a back shoulder defender on Papley and run. That makes sense, obviously. I agree. I think their midfield's a weakness. And so, they've done fantastic with their numbers in terms of their ability to win contests with that midfield. So all credit to them. And I think they're a super well coached team. So that must be a factor. But, a midfield of Parker, who, he's a solid player. You've got Mills who can go in through there. Of course, Heaney can spend some time through there. But for me, their key is Chad Warner, the way he's playing at the moment. He's key to the way they transition the ball. He leads them for total and average metres gained. And he's been really important to them. So I suspect I agree that they won't sort of tag anyone for Heaney, for instance, not in the way that people often think of it, not in the way it was 10 years ago. I think that's who was the poster, Andy, that made the comment? I think the comment that they put
CHF.
Yeah, that they put time into players and limit their effectiveness that's a good way of thinking about it, particularly on offense, and then look to exploit them on defense. But having said all that, I wouldn't be shocked if they put some extra time into a couple of players, actually, one of which is Chad Warner, a young player who will be who's an energy player who they'll be looking to limit their effect, not least because he's so critical for a team that isn't very strong isn't a territory team and doesn't have good numbers around their metres gained. He is their leading metres gained player. He's going to be critical to their ability to move the ball from their defence to their offence. So I suspect that they'll put a bit of time into him. And the other one who's similar, and I reckon that they might put some time into, is Goulden. Goulden is just a brilliant kick of the footy, and he is really, really important to the way they move the ball with short, sharp kicks forward. Like they play a similar game to West Coast in 2018, but more forward. They move it forward, and a lot of that's depending on their skilled kicks, like Goulden being one of them. Blakely not so much in terms of short kick, but he's good depth kicking. So I wouldn't be shocked if they put time into him and time into Warner, actually, in the way that they did with Bailey last week.
And how do you think the ruck contest will go? Because theirs is basically Hickey and Reid back up.
Yeah, well, I reckon that's a really good question. I was just wondering about that before we came on, is that I put some notes here who I thought were key players. And the key players that I listed that I thought were critical were Paddy McCartan and stopping him, because he leads their intercepts. He's really both of the McCartan boys, but particularly Paddy, in terms of stopping that transition. Goulden, as I mentioned, Warner, Blakey is a similar one to shut him off and to stop his transition. But for me, in the others, was Hickey, because Hickey, if he doesn't have a big game and doesn't at least break even in the midfield with tap outs and his grunt work around the ground, that spells trouble for them, really. He is such a critical player for them. He's got to play out of his skin for them to have a chance of getting first look at the footy.
All right. Also, to add, Sydney their other ruckman that was in the twos, Peter Laddams, was handed a 4-game suspension, down to 3 with an early guilty plea when he ran through Taj Woden on Saturday. So, they don't have that as an option. Bigfoot asks, I assume that James Jordan did not play for Casey because he was not eligible due to not having played enough games in the twos during the season. If James is not selected for the Demons this week, and barring injuries is unlikely that he will play, who do we play on the other wing?
This is a difficult question. There's been some conversations about it, and I don't think the AFL knows their own rules. James had played 22 games this season, and Bowie was in the same situation last week. Now, according to the VFL rules, they're not allowed to play if they have played 13 games in the season. So on that basis, they wouldn't accept that. And I can't find the regulations anywhere, but from a couple of years ago, if your senior team was playing, then you could put whoever you liked into the VFL
Yeah,
side.
that's not the case anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, so...
because of the bye, I think. It must be because of the bye. And it's also, the other weird thing, George, is that it's 12 games. Any more than 12, you can't play.
Yeah.
But they don't, unless you're an unused Medisub.
That's right.
So you're unused. If you're an unused Medisub, it still counts towards your total games played in the AFL, but not
for the VFL.
Not for the VFL rule, which was, I only knew that because there was some controversy around Setterfield.
Yeah, and the AFL only came out with that interpretation today. Here we are in the middle of after the fact. So, so whether Jimmy Jordan and Bowie were allowed to play or not, I don't think we really know yet. But what was it? Back to the original question?
The question just was who plays on the other wing? How do we utilise that other wing? James Jordan's played there most of the season.
Yeah, I think short of him actually being injured, which we don't know about, of course, I think he'll be back there on that wing again for this game. He's played 22. He's played 22 games. He'll be back.
Who will come out then? Because Salos will come back into the team.
All right. Well, let's we'll talk about that a bit later on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
So my answer to that question is, if he doesn't come back in, is that they'll keep playing Spargo there.
Yeah,
I mean that's what they've done. But he's again, if you watch Spargo play, it doesn't play it
he's not a winger.
But he's also not playing. That's not the role he's almost playing. Is that so he's not a winger in the way that Jordan's been playing it, that point-to-point running. But he has a specific. It's almost like a high half forward, and then they play the halfback flank who comes up to him. So that's like a dual wing role almost.
Do you think? I mean, this is probably a question for at the end of the season, but do you think we should target another wingman, or do you think you only need the one like the Langdon, because we only sort of really go up one side? We utilise one side of the field, so we've got that sort of covered, and then we can just use a miscellaneous
talk about
player.
Eamon. Wanting Eamon because he could play the
he's
wing. I don't know.
Nominated Hawthorn, but do you go for another wingman, or we don't have that need?
We're getting into trade week here.
Yeah, we are. Sorry.
Yeah, come on.
I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about ins and outs.
I hope they
trade
re-sign. I hope Howes looks like he could play wing because he looks like Robbie Flowers.
Anyway,
we've still got Rosman and Baker down there racking up possessions every week.
Yeah. Yeah, we got wingers, mate.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll shelve that conversation for another time. Forward line, despite many Demon fans contending that our weakest link is our forward line, we did in fact score 48 points more this season than we did last season. That's 8 goals more in a year where we had a much tougher draw. So make of that what you will. Demonland posted defence says Paddy McCartan is a key worry for me as Bim Man's highlighted. He was All-Australian worthy this year. I feel like he's really going to shine in these finals. Personally, I think we have to attack with smaller types, providing running pressure. I think he would eat T-Mac alive at the moment. You want to talk about Sydney's defence? Go for it. And how our forwards will.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting with Paddy McCartan because he is their leading intercept marker. He's been a revelation. It's one of the best, isn't it? A fantastic story in footy because number one pick, all of the, the connection with Petrarca and, Saints fans. But I love the way he plays footy and I love the role he plays back there. And I love the obvious synergy that he has with his brother down there. And so together they make up a critical combination in terms of the way they play footy. It reminds me a little bit, we've shifted this year. It was interesting you talk about All-Australian, Andy, is Lever. There wasn't really any discussion of Lever being even was he in the squad?
No.
I can't remember. I don't think he wasn't even in the squad. But if you think back to last year, people talked about the two pillars of Lever and May being absolutely fundamental to our success. That's not been the case this year. People aren't talking about it in the way. They both complement both players all the time. But last year it was all about how fundamental Lever and May were to our chances and the way we played footy. That shifted for a lot of reasons, not least of which our system is a bit more fluid, I think. And also you've got Petty in the mix now. So it's actually 3 tools down there that sort of operate. I think the reason I bring that up is I think the two McCartan brothers are similar to the May and Lever were last year. Paddy McCartan in particular with his intercept marking, so totally agree with defence. I suspect that they'll put Melksham to him. Melksham's been playing that role against the key intercept defender from the opposition and with help from, other forwards getting across to the contest, obviously. I expect Melksham will go to him and look to shut him out completely, so which might mean that Melksham won't have much offensively as he did last week. He was on Payne last week. Payne, so as way of comparison, I looked at the height of Payne is it Payne who's the Bright Lions player? It is Payne, isn't it?
He was certainly down there.
And he's bigger and taller than McCartan. So I think that if he can take him, he can take McCartan. So I think that will be important. They'll look to shut that out. And they're all over defence is terrific. They're all team defence. They're a really well-drilled team. They use a pretty similar model to us, except they don't have that goalkeeper in the same way that we do with that triangle with the point at the background, which I can't work out why other teams don't do that because it's so effective. But having said that, their numbers are really impressive defensively. And so, I think that is going to be critical to it's critical to they've got 2 players that's critical to the way they move the ball, which is Paddy McCartan and his intercept marking, his brother to a lesser degree, and then their run off the halfback flank. So I think Blakely is critical. Don't give him space. He really reminds me of Bailey Dale, the way the Dogs use him, Bailey Dale, in a similar way, that get the ball, run off halfback flank, run hard and kick deep. They'll look to really, reduce his ability to run into space. And if they can stop him and if they can also stop McCartan into getting too many intercept marks, it'll go a long, long way, I reckon, to winning this game. And, you add into the mix down there Fox, Lloyd, Florent as well, who's an excellent kick, but a good defender. And I forget his name, Ryan Clark, I think, isn't it? Is a lockdown defender, plays as a defensive forward. He's not a defender, but he plays as a defensive forward. And he might look to go to a player like Cozzy. So whilst he's not a defender, obviously he plays forward, that he plays a similar role to Melksham, although on smaller players. So they've got an excellent defence, strong, they're well-drilled, good all-team defence. it's going to be absolutely critical to stretch them and to put them under as much pressure as possible.
They've got, and you forgot about a bloke called Rampy who sits in there.
Rampy,
Rampy and Lloyd are just superb at being that last line of defence. But I think how well our forwards will perform will depend how quickly the ball comes out of the middle. They will break if it comes down there far too often for them and comes out quickly. Ben Brown's going to be a problem for him. I think he's got a good amount of height that's going to worry them. And the other one is Cozzy. I don't know who they're going to put on. They're going to have to move someone onto him, and their traditional back line doesn't have that sort of player to be able to do that at the moment. So it'll be interesting what Longmire comes up with, and he is a superb coach, and they are very well drilled. They've got the problem again, what to do with people like Fritsch and Cozzy, who are scoring most of our goals and have done so for the whole season.
You make a good point about Brown's height too, because neither McCartan brothers are actually that tall. No. I mean, they're taller than me, but then
and Rampy and Lloyd aren't either. They're good, solid performance, but they're not tall. Yeah. And if
somehow or other, I've got Ryan Clark playing on Cozzy from the forward line, so I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, let's get into our strengths and weaknesses. We're going to talk about strengths and weaknesses of both teams. Before we do, Demonlander, D's Nuts wants to know, does either Sydney or Melbourne have a particular advantage due to the field geometry relative to the SCG/MCG, and will this be a factor? Does it enhance or make our tactics more difficult to execute? Funnily
enough, I reckon that the SCG probably suits us better in some respects than them, because our ability to clog space and to stop the switch is so critical to us. And, the smaller the ground, the easier it is to do that. But having said that, the big open spaces of the G, if we will be as fit as we have been at any point this whole season, Friday night, and comparatively, I expect that we'll be fitter, fresher, faster than the Swans, and therefore you get the most advantage of any comparative fitness advantage on the bigger the space, the more advantage you're going to get, particularly as it relates to leg speed, I think.
And the other big advantage we'll get out of the MCG is there's probably going to be about 75,000 Melbourne supporters there from the sounds of things.
Yeah, and we might actually go to the MCG and support the D's with more D's fans, George.
Yes, exactly.
B-Man, I'm pretty sure the last time we played the Swans was smack bang in the loading period as well. So hopefully the legs are a bit fresher.
We run out of puff in that game, but it's easy to forget we were pretty well up in that game, travelling all right. If we kicked accurately, we really should have put that game to bed by three-quarter time.
Possibly earlier, we were 5 goals to 3 points with a few minutes to go in the first quarter. So fluff that. Watson 11.
Sorry, Andy. People forget in that game what actually transpired. First of all, we didn't have a Stephen May. Petty was off the ground for long periods of time. I think he had a 20-minute concussion test, had injuries to shoulders and shin. Tommy Mack pulled out just before the game. Hibberd was not available. Rivers was playing at Casey. Hunt was only got 3 possessions for the whole game. We just had Harms, Langdon, and Salem return for their first games after injury and reselection. We had Mitch Brown playing at full forward. And then in the third and fourth quarters, we kicked 1 goal 5 and 1 goal 1. So it wasn't surprising, given the state of play in terms of players. I think they moved Mitch Brown down to the back line at one stage because Petty was off the ground, no May, and he was the tallest player down the back line. It was alongside Lever. They were trying to hold back the wall. It wasn't surprising that things changed. But,
Mitch Brown played in that game.
Yeah.
And Maxie had a just killer game, didn't he?
Yeah. Maxie, yeah,
amazing.
Watson 11 says, looking at Wheelo ratings, He's a poster on Demonland. Looking at his stats on another thread, Sydney and Melbourne are pretty well matched. If Sydney have weaknesses, they are relatively poor, not terrible, in defending marks on lead, causing opposition, stopping. Don't know what that means. Stopping opposition shots on goal, and bottom 6 for centre clearances. Considering where they rank poorly, what tactics do you think we will use this week? I'm guessing we will try and play a typical forward 50 game, and it will be decided on our forward 50 pressure and scores we generate from forward half turnover. But interested in your thoughts. If we can generate reasonable score from turnover, Sydney can't win. And I'll just give a shout out to Demonland poster Junior Mac, who went back to our round 12 encounter with the Swans and did a very thorough analysis of the entire match. One of the observations that he made it was that during the fourth quarter, with about 14 minutes to go, we were 7 points up and had scored our 9 goals for the match, and 7 had been from stoppage and 0 from turnovers. We tend to and just in general, we do tend to score heavily when we're scoring from turnovers. So in that match, were not scoring from turnovers at all. So that's my thoughts on that. Do you guys have any thoughts on
the what's an 11? So I'll talk to this a bit later. The Wheelo ratings, the AFL Premiership metrics, but so he's right. The some of the stats are really, really similar. Between Melbourne and Sydney. The one that really was weird, What's an 11 noted that just before you read out there, Andy, is opposition marks on lead. We're number 2 in the AFL for that statistic. Sydney are 10th at giving up opposition marks on lead. And, I saw that question and I saw those numbers as well. And that's the thing that I find interesting with stats is like, what would be the reason for that? That's a curious stat for a top team to be mid-table on. So, it might mean that they give up channels, for instance, for teams to run into, or that they struggle with teams who are coming out at them. I actually think their biggest weakness, and we'll touch on the weaknesses, I guess, is where we've got a big advantage on them. And What's an 11 sort of touches on this. We're at our best when we're scoring from turnovers and we're putting massive pressure on. We're a territory team. That's all about, as we've talked about often this season, is being a territory team, getting it in our front half and keeping it in our front half. And that's our model in a nutshell, really, of the way we like to play. The Swans are different, so that's their big difference in the statistics and the way they play to our game. They've got a lot of similarities in the sense that they're strong at the contest, although they weren't strong until the last 6 or 7 rounds of the season in contested ball. Before that, they were only mid-table. It's only been in the last 6 or 7 weeks that they've got their act together on that front. But metres gained is a really important stat for Melbourne and for most footy teams, because it really is a very good measure on your ability to be a territory team. We're number 2 in the AFL for metres gained at the moment, and Sydney are 10th. And that's a big difference for a top 14 to be sort of that low. Interestingly, Freo 12th. So they've really struggled in the last third of the season to get it forward, Freo. And I think for a similar reason to the Swans, which is their game is built when they do move the balls. That's Swans' transition game is built around those sharp kicks that they do. They hit lead-up targets. They're really skilled. But my theory is the pressure of finals. We talked before about a model, a way of playing that's built for finals. We haven't really talked about it as much as we did last year, but it's pressure. It's all about pressure and things that break down under pressure, exactly those sorts of kicks. So I think that's a big area. Their transition game's a strength, but it's a real weakness of them. It's a real thing that we can exploit, because our game is bulletproof if we bring the pressure, and we will turn them over. We will hurt a player like Goulden. We won't give him space. We won't give Blakey the ability to run 20 metres and then deliver it, deep. We'll cut out the Chad Warner. We won't give him space to run into. So I think that transition game is a problem for them and a real weakness.
Well, do either of you guys want to outline any other strengths or weaknesses from either of the teams before we move on to tactics?
I think the main strength that we've got, and this is what Goody's philosophy has been about, it is about contest. And I think we've simply got a better contest side. Those stats that were provided then, while we're not getting the ones from turnover, we're consistently getting them from the contest players. Like I said before, we've got the best mids in the business. So I think we'll just overwhelm them simply. We'll get the territory, we'll get the distance. The ball will just finish up in our forward line far too often for them to be able to repel us. So I'll just stick with that again. I think we've got the best rucks who'll continue to provide our best mids with plenty of opportunity. The problem is for the Swans to try and counter that, and I don't think they've got the players. Firstly, they were singularly unimpressive in that last game against St Kilda. They should never have let St Kilda close in that game, but they did. So yeah, there's cracks. There's cracks in their team. I won't say in their game plan because they are very strong with planning and coaching. But I think they've got cracks with individuals in their teams, which we will now exploit because we're pretty well at full strength, and we've got the tried and tested players that you need in finals.
It's interesting you mentioned that Swans St Kilda game. The other worry, if I was a Swans fan, I'd be a little bit worried about is that you couldn't ask for bigger motivation for them to keep going right to the line in that game. They had a chance for a home final to play in Sydney and really looked like they ran out of gas a little bit in that last quarter. Saints really, it wasn't just that Saints should have beaten them, but they looked like they were sort of struggling to get to the line a bit, Sydney, in that game, I thought, and really should have lost it, really. If King had kicked accurately in that last quarter, they almost certainly would have. Just really quickly, I reckon the Swans' strengths and weaknesses. Strengths, I think the transition is both the strength and the weaknesses I was mentioning before, but their transition through their brilliant field kicking. I love the way they kick the ball, and in particular Goulden. So their ball use and kicking is definitely a strength. They've got a really good defensive system, and I think they're well drilled. I couldn't agree more, George. They're super well coached. He's a fantastic coach. He's different to, I talked earlier in the year of system coach versus, coach A, coach B type, and Goody being the coach B system model, whereas someone like Clarkson is more, and Scott more on the day using tactics and moving their players around. Longmire was definitely in that camp. But he's got a team that's obviously clever enough to do what they're told, which is no small, and I don't mean that facetiously. If you're going to do that sort of stuff on the day and move people around, they've got players like Callum Mills who can go to play different roles, can go to halfback flank, can go to the wing, same as Heaney can play in different positions. Someone like, even Papley, probably not so much Papley, but Callum Mills, for instance, is like our Brayshaw, can play in multiple positions, wing, halfback, hard at it, loves to tackle, a sort of a role player. You need players like that if you're going to be tactically fluid like Longmire is. So their leadership, I reckon they've got great leadership. That's a huge positive for them. As I said, they're well coached and they're super disciplined. They don't give away many stupid free kicks. They're not going to do what Brisbane did and try and come out with some sort of stupid mind game and try to get into our heads. They're not. They're going to channel their energy into the way they play their footy and their contested ball. Their weaknesses, I'm not convinced by their midfield. I think that's a real weakness. I think, as I said before, the territory game is a weakness. I think that's the modern Flags are one playing territory. They're not playing territory footy. So I just don't see them as a contender. I think it's a real problem for finals. They've got to do something about that. I'm not convinced by their forward line for the reasons George mentioned before, but particularly if we can slow that transition, if we can slow that ball movement, suddenly they are kicking long into crowded forward line and they just don't have the marking power up there. They've got good ground players, but Papley, I reckon, is a player you can shut out. And, we've played a lot of games against him where he hasn't made any impact whatsoever in the last few years. And so if you can take away that transition game, I think it's a bit like what do you take away from Melbourne that's really going to hurt us? it's so hard to find a thing that you could take away to hurt us. But if we take away their ability to move the ball with short, sharp kicking down the ground or even quickly, they're going to struggle against us. So I think it sets up well from that perspective for us.
All right, we've had quite a few questions from our listeners about tactics, so perhaps we'll go through those. And once we've answered them, Binman, you as our tactician, can expand or present your own theories on the tactics that each team is likely to employ. Demonised asks, okay, we've seen plan A, move it deliberately along the boundary line. Plan B, move it more quickly with some switching. How likely is it that we're going to see a plan C? Not Binman, I might ask you this one. Do we have plan C?
We've probably covered most of the things I was going to talk on in tactics.
That's
but
right.
So, Andy, just with that, because it relates to this question, if you could play that clip by Ben Brown, and just before you do, I'll set it up. The context of this clip is this is directly after the Brisbane game, and funnily enough, I was going to make it a bit longer, but Ben Brown, who's an excellent interviewee, I really like his honesty, and he's as straight as the road is long, BB. But he was asked about our forward weaknesses and our issues with our forward line, and this is before the clip. He almost laughed to say, well, he doesn't really see any weaknesses, or he doesn't see any issues with the forward line. And it's relevant for this question because BB talks about how hard we are to play against and that we can play in multiple ways. So, yeah, if you could...
Are you sure that's the clip you asked me to play? I've got the right clip, but the timestamp, he wasn't talking about our forward line. He was talking about
no,
moving
that's
the ball
right
into...
one.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
And at the other end, Ben, I mean, particularly in the first half, only 5 scoring shots they got from 26 inside 50 inches. But it seems so obvious you're trying to block the centre square so the opposition can't bring the ball cross field, make them kick down the line, and that's where your aerial defenders are so strong.
Oh, for sure. We've got a really strong back six, and particularly our keys are some of the best in the league down the back line. So the more we can play into their hands, I think the better. But again, I think we can win in multiple ways, and that's what makes us difficult to play against. I think when we're at our best is we can go fast, we can go slow, we can force them into playing that slower game, but we can take it up to teams that try to go faster. So I think at the end of the day, if you've got the right mix, you're going to give yourself the best chance in September, and that's hopefully what we'll do.
So thanks, Ed. That's really, it was my point writ large that I was saying last week, is that we play what's in front of us. And so, against Freo, we completely stop their ability to move the ball. And we might do something against here. Against Brisbane, who like to move the ball fast, we're happy to move the ball fast. That's that point that he made, that we can win in different ways, makes us incredibly hard to beat. As he said, if we can go slow if we want, but we can also go fast. And so that plan A, plan B, plan C in the question is that really I think there's one plan with variations on a theme, and that I think we put tweaks into it. As I said last week, I'm convinced that we're going to go out hard and look to dominate and to put our stamp on. We did I watched it, as I said, the qualifying final from last year, and that's exactly what we did, although we gave up a lot of goals on the counter as well. But I think that's my point really about the model, is that we will respond to what they do, but we've got multiple ways of winning, and other teams don't. Not many other teams do. For Swans to beat us, they're going to have the game looking like how they like to have it. We can have the game looking, in multiple different ways. We can, as Benny Brown was saying, we can play fast, we can play slow. The other thing, just that he touched on at the beginning of that, is so critical to our game plan, is Lee Matthews was asking about our ability to stop the ball getting kicked into the corridor. And so that's critical whoever we play. So we've got those different ways of playing, but they're built on fundamentals, which is protect the corridor, pressure, ability to swarm, running up and down the ground, and to win the contest. But not just win the contests, win the contest ahead of the clearances and those post-clearance contested possessions. Get those fundamentals right, and then we can play different ways. We can play plan A, plan B, plan C. So it makes us incredibly challenging to play against, I reckon.
There was an interesting clip during the week on the club website from Greg Stafford, and he was talking about forward moves, and there was one particular phrase or a sentence that he used when they were talking about the way Melbourne moves the ball into the forward line, where he said, "We have to look at the risk profile. We prefer the ball to be kept in the forward area, not having to react when the ball goes the other way." So I thought that goes a long way to explaining, when people get frustrated about kicking into the pockets and the way players move and who's not lowering their eyes and things like that. Quite often, it's not about moving the ball in there; it's stopping the ball coming out. So I thought that was just another interesting side to the way that we play around our forwards.
Yeah, and there was an incident last week, and it sort of relates to that. It also relates to the idea of playing territory. If you're trying to think about that drilled into the team, how does that look like on the field when they're making a decision? In the first quarter, I think it was, Petrarca looked up, had the ball in hand on the half-back flank, and looked up and had no one ahead. You could see that on the camera angle. Had no one ahead of the ball. Almost every other team in that circumstance would go lateral and pick out a player. But he didn't. He kicked it as long as he could down the field, knowing that it was going to come back. He was kicking to an empty space in front of him. And sure enough, it did. But that was our game. So you don't go backwards and risk turning it over on your half-back flank, is what you're saying, George. Similarly, it's not the percentage play, even though most footy fans are going, what the hell's Petrarca doing? And he's kicking it 60 metres down the field to no one, and it's going to come back, and sure enough, it did. When it did, we were able to set up and we turned that ball back on its journey back, if that makes sense. So you can see that play out, that percentage, each game, can't you, George, with their decision-making. And it's drilled into them. It's just drilled into them. When in doubt, go to the pocket.
Yep. The other thing that I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, and we actually saw it in the grand final last year, was when it goes into the pocket, look for one of the talls to punch it or drop it down towards the boundary line. That was the classic Petrarca goal in the grand final, because Tommy Mack basically palmed it down to him. But in this last game, there was against Brisbane, there was a similar one where Ben Brown did exactly the same thing in that pocket, pushed it to the outside, Petrarca scooped it up, gave it to Fritsch, who's sitting in the goal square.
Yeah.
So it's about percentages. Go, instead of kicking it to the middle, creating a marking contest, which most forwards are unlikely to mark, bring it to ground to the best possible position, and you'll get further opportunities to score, rather than just hoping that someone's got longer arms or a stronger mark than the opposition defenders.
And if it goes over, we reset with the best ruckman in the league.
Yep.
Rhino asks, how do we cope with Sydney's flooding? They're experts at clogging up our forward line. And in answer to Rhino's question, Dino's says, I think the reason our forward line was flooded last time had more to do with us than with them. We moved the ball way too slow, which allowed them to flood back in numbers, probably due to fatigue. If you watch last year's finals, you'll see that our transition play from defensive 50 was excellent. We switched the ball more often with the likes of Langdon, but the key was our forward sprinted the other way, causing an outnumber up forward because teams couldn't go with us. I may be wrong though, and we aren't allowed this freedom now for whatever reason, but I'd like to hear what the boys on the pod think.
No, I totally agree. That's
Longmire
will get pushback. He's clever. He's smart. They stopped. That one thing about the Swans that I heard today that I think is worth noting is their last 5 games against top 8 teams they've won. And they've kept teams in the 60-point range that who are heavy scorers. So they will push back if it becomes a slow game. But the counter to that is that we don't mind congestion up in our forward line. We spend a lot of our time if we trap the ball into our forward, it's always going to be congested. So we're built, as George was saying before, we're built for those contests. We're built for ground ball gets. As Dinos suggests, we're fit and firing now, so we're swarming forward in numbers. So it's less likely to be able to be that they'll be flooding back, but there will be definitely periods of the game where our forward line's chock-a-block full of players.
Buck Naked asks, where does the panel think the game will be won or lost, and what is the way that Sydney will try and beat us? I can't really get a handle on their game, so would be interested in your take.
The only thing I would suggest that Sydney will try to do is keep the scoring as low as possible to keep them within range, hoping to jag it towards the end. Their flooding tactics are all premeditated on that premise.
What did you have before the show, George?
What pre-medication are you on?
Yeah, put that scotch down, a bit of pre-medication.
You'd be pleased to know I'm a teetotaler. So that's how bad I am. Their game is around stopping the opposition, keeping them in control, keeping within range, and to a certain extent hoping that they can score those goals in the last, standards of the game. But they're going to run up against a Melbourne team that's completely different to the last time that they played. We're going to have a raft of defenders on the ground in our own right this time. Our forward line's going to be almost completely different than the last time played. We've got a full fit side, so I'm sure they'll try the same tactics. They'll try the flooding to limit the damage that's caused to them. But like in the Brisbane game, the damage could be done very quickly, very early, and I suspect that's exactly what we'll do.
And I'll give you the tip. Like there'll be, for all the talk about our predictability of kicking from May to that point, is that no team's going to magically find a way to exploit that. Geelong's effort this season notwithstanding. What we can be sure is Longmire will do some tactically clever things and try some different things. They will have the questions, that's what you were saying, George, is what do they do about our midfield? Do they tag Noliver? If you tag Noliver, well, Brayshaw gets, on the offensive side of contest. If, you track, does he play more in the midfield or goes up forward? The problem, again, is if what Ben Brown, we've got different ways of winning. So, as I've said a lot of times, one of our advantages is that our strength is our defensive system. So what? What do you disrupt? That doesn't impact the game. Their strength is their ability to use the ball sharp as they transition. If you take that away from them, they're in trouble. It's really hard to know where you'd go about sort of negating Melbourne's strengths.
Denox asks, does Sydney try similar manning up tactics that Carlton did a couple of weeks ago? I'm also thinking we're likely to play our game our way without adapting to counter Sydney too much. However, we do have a penchant for picking 1 to 2 key opposition players and countering, negating their influence. Interestingly, we have often been a bit left field in our choice of target. Bailey, not Neil, last week was an example. Will we try to unexpectedly seek to curtail the influence of a second tier but surprisingly important cog, and if so, who? I guess that's that question of tagging, but going for, someone like
well, actually,
Bailey.
I saw that question on Dreamland, which got me thinking, which is why I thought that potentially Chad Warner and Goulden are the ones. I mean, Chad Warner's playing so well that arguably he's better than a second stringer, but more I was thinking that, would Heaney is the one that maybe you'd put time into ordinarily. But I suspect Goulden and Chad Warner, they're both so critical to the way they move the ball. And Goulden's kicking doesn't get huge numbers, but he's such a good kick and Chad Warner's he reminds me a bit of Waitman. He's for the Dogs in the sense that if he gets up and about, his energy is really infectious for that team. So I would not be surprised on the back of that from that question is they put some time into both Goulden and Chad Warner. The
other one I'd put time into is Blakey because he's the equivalent of Salem. He gets a lot of ground, a lot of territory. He's excellent overhead. He's a great kick, and he's fast, and he uses the ball well. So
who would you?
It won't be a tagging type of role.
No, they'll just look to give him space to run into.
Yeah, you've got to limit him. That's the trick. So
got to put him under pressure. So he a bit like the way that they play Rich. These are very similar, like not similar players, but similarly important in the sense that Rich and Blakey want to run with the ball for 15, 20 metres before releasing it and releasing it long. Just don't give him any space to run into and make all of the kicks under pressure. And suddenly he's not such a great one-on-one player, Blakely, and so you could expose him a bit for his defensive work.
El Diablo 14 wants to know, what is the single most important KPI the team needs to be ahead of the opposition? For me, it's like against Sydney, the contested footy metrics will be a deciding factor. Contested footy's our bread and butter.
Yeah, pressure. I think for us it's metres gained, you know. I mean, well, I think it's a given contested ball is our, I forget now, I read it during the week, but we've won our contested ball number for the last 6 weeks, I think, in even in our losses. I'm pretty sure. So it's sort of given, really, but I think it's such a hard baked into the way we play footy. I don't think we're going to have to worry about contested ball. So I think the number that they'll be looking at is metres gained. And there was some on that thread, we'll talk about it in a sec, but it was a great post from DJR who talked about the importance of metres gained. He says the metres gained stat is very interesting. It demonstrates which teams are the most effective at moving the ball with run and carry and breaking lines from their defensive zone. To be the best requires high levels of fitness. This year we're number 2. This was before the after the Blues game. This year we are number 2, averaging 6,128 metres per game, to just behind Richmond, who were 61.67. We were number 1 last year with 6,883, so we're doing better in that stat than we were last year. And against the Blues and Pies, we're 5,600 odd, and then 5,682 against the Pies. But against last week against the Lions, DGR noted that we were 6,450 metres gained. In the quarterfinal last year, qualifying final was 6,800. Preliminary final 6,500 and 6,500 in the grand final. So we are up to our premiership winning, our finals metres gained last week. For me, that's the number that they'll be looking at. Metres gained and time in forward half are the two ones that the club put a lot of stock in. Apart from contested ball is a given, and pressure, like, you know, all manner of ways of counting pressure.
You know what I put stock in? Kicking goals.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Andy. I think that was the answer on the thread as well from some other poster. But it's not as silly as it sounds, because if we come out and play the same way that we did against Brisbane and kick multiple goals, put the pressure on very early, the Swans don't like that at all. They don't want to be chasing. Yeah. They want to keep within range of you to try and grind you down. If we come out and kick 5 or 6 goals in the first quarter, they're in a lot of strife, and especially if they start dropping off like they apparently did in the St Kilda game, we could see a real blowout.
Well, and goals are an outcome.
Yes,
and metres gained and intensity and pressure are inputs.
Up to it.
Yeah. So.
Mind you, we were 5 goals to 3 points in the first quarter last time. There were, as we've talked, mitigating circumstances.
We lost half our back line.
Yeah. Stu has 2 questions. Sydney, number 1, Sydney overcome their contested ball deficiencies by spreading hard from the contest. As we're great in the contest and can also spread well, how do you see that influencing the Swans' ability to win first use of the ball?
It's a great question, but it's along the lines of what I was just talking about, because our pressure will mean that it's so important for them, that ability to transition. That's how they transition. They've got to get it to the outside. That's why I think it's a potential weakness for them in the finals, because it's like the Dogs game, different in the sense the Dogs rely on handballs to chain away from their stoppages. The Swans bring an extra, sometimes 2 extra to win that stoppage, but they chain away often with those kicks. But you put enough pressure on them on any kick, then there's a chance for it to break down, that chain to break down. So for me, the answer to that question is our ability to pressure. And it's like George was saying, I mean, we've got ability to do all of those things. We can run, we can cover, we can spread. A big thing for us is that extra fitness and our physical readiness, because it means we get, like I was saying last week, they get a player out in space who wants to deliver the ball, we've got 3 players around him chasing that player down when we're up and about, like we did against Brisbane. We gave them no ability, no space to deliver the ball. If we can, and Brisbane are similar. They really rely on those short, sharp kicks to move the ball up the field as well. So I think the pressure that we'll bring to the ball and our ability to get multiple players to the contest and to disrupt that kick will be the key, really. If we're not bringing that pressure, then they'll cut us up. They will move the ball down the ground. It's as simple as that. But I just can't see it happening.
His other question, I think we've sort of talked about this. Longmire likes to change up tactics game to game and appears to have a group that is easy to instruct, as we've talked about. How do you see this chop and change style holding up in the heat of finals intensity? And you've sort of answered that you don't think it will hold up.
No, I just think that we can see what the premiership model is since the Tigers really changed the landscape, and I don't think that the Swans' current model fits into that template. But who knows? Maybe in a couple of years, their model will be the model, and every team will need to play catch up with them and get really good kicks across all lines.
Spargonicus in the thread late said, I'd like some discussion on why some teams match up well against other teams. Sydney and Collingwood have great records against us lately. How can this be? How could North beat us 20 times in a row, admittedly during the Great Depression? How can we have the Lions measure? Surely the personnel shift too much year to year to be a true match-up thing. Does it speak more of the mental side of the sport, which is huge? Bin Man often criticises people ignoring loading in favour of mental weakness, but surely the mental side of things is quite a significant factor. Is it game-style matchups? For example, Lions play ultra-attacking and we're built for defence first, so the margins for error are smaller.
How do you answer that one? I'm not a great fan of the mental aspects. I think there are so many other factors that go into a game of football that we currently are very good at. We've got the right sort of players. We've got the right sort of fitness systems. We've got the right sort of game plans. People keep falling back on this mental weakness when teams are losing. There's a whole stack of other factors, I think, which are far more critical to the success or otherwise of a team rather than the mental. There are certainly individual problems which arise at all clubs playing this sort of game at this sort of level. You have a psychologist to work on that sort of thing. And once again, if you look at the club website, there was a fantastic interview this week with one of them talking about exactly that. But the team as a whole are not mentally weak, or the mental strength comes from the conviction that we've got the systems in place which are going to work and have proven to do so.
Yeah, and as for the question of why some teams struggle against others, it's a bit hard to tell. I mean, it depends what sort of distance you go back in time for Melbourne, because if you go back any more than 3-4 years, we lost a lot of games of footy. So we did poorly against every team. I mean, there is definitely a factor about when you play them, I reckon, a little bit. I reckon we struggle against Collingwood because we play them in the middle of the year in the last few years, which jibes with what I was saying about loading. But there's definitely some game styles will do better against others against maybe in home away, not finals. So we've got a model that he doesn't muck around with, Goodwin, and he doesn't try too many tricks to win games. He I think, we've talked about it, but that repetition of things pays off right now. It pays off when they kick to the boundary, not under pressure, and kick to the corridor and turn it over. And what the sort of interplay between that routine but also their fitness is, when they're under pressure and make a mistake, that's a mental weakness. If they make an error because they're not across things. But I mean, our record against Sydney actually is, I think I've heard today we've lost 5. Out of the last 17, we've only won 5 or something. So I think there's probably really a statistical anomaly in there as well in terms of, why it is. The easiest answer for Melbourne was we're a rubbish team for a long time, I reckon. So exactly, I think that is evening out. Those numbers will even out, particularly if we get the chance to play Collingwood in the finals.
Right, let's move on to some predictions about this week. A lefty asks, if we lose this week, we'll be playing the winner of Brisbane and Richmond at the MCG. Who would the panellists prefer to play? Do you have a preference if we do lose? I know both of you don't think we will, but if we do, who do you want to play?
I don't want to play Richmond if I can avoid, because they've got a system that's a finals winning system, and I think we're a much better team than them. But they've got the system that's closest to ours, particularly with Freo dropping away a little bit in terms of their ability to execute that system. It's a bloody tough way of playing footy, and it's probably got a shelf life to it as well. But they're just man for man, pound for pound, we're a much, much stronger team. So no, I'm not really concerned about any, but I would prefer not to play Richmond if that was an option.
Yeah, and Brisbane, if Brisbane won to be able to get through, it'd be, I think you'd see a repeat of what happened to Geelong in the finals when they came up against us last year. After the round 23 game, they came up against us a couple of weeks later. They weren't the same sort of team that we played, and I think Brisbane would be in the same boat.
Having said all that,
go ahead.
Having said all of that, I reckon one of the best bets this weekend is Brisbane to beat Richmond.
You reckon?
220 you're getting on their home deck.
Oh, in terms of
it's
betting.
just it's. I mean,
but
it's
who do you
crazy.
think will win? Take out the.
I think Brisbane will win.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I think Brisbane will win, and people will go, what happened last week? The reason they're 220 is because of that stupid narrative that I talked about last week. Was it Melbourne or was it Brisbane? It wasn't Brisbane, it was Melbourne. If they play anywhere near as well as they played last week, despite getting beaten by nearly 10 goals, they will beat Richmond.
Wow. Okay. If we win this week, we'll go straight into a prelim and potentially face Geelong, Collingwood, Fremantle or Bulldogs at the G. Who of that quartet would you prefer to face off in a preliminary final?
Too far ahead for me, Andy.
Are we going to take it 1 week at a time? Who's going to win? Yeah, go ahead.
There's an awful lot of games to go through before we get to that stage. And as we know, a week's a long time in footy. There'll be injuries. There'll be form slumps, form rises. It's just too far ahead.
Well, these are my questions. These are lefties' questions. So who's going to win this week? Because we won't go too much into the other matches because we're getting long. We've still got a few other things to do. So who's going to win this week?
Ben Man will give you the answer. He's got
go
all
on,
the odds.
Ben Man. Who's winning?
I'll give you the... I've been trying to calm down on David King, but I listened to his thing on SEN today, and I just couldn't help it. So he speaks to this issue about who we might play. Now, this guy, he drives me nuts, but he's like, I can't look away. So he says that he reckons this is quote unquote. I'm not sure what he means by this. David King believes it's potentially an easier path to the grand final, the Melbourne-Sydney path, right? Because we flip. So assuming the Cats knock off the Magpies, they'll likely take on the Pies, Dockers and Bulldogs. David King believes it's potentially the easier path to the grand final. This will be a cracking game, Melbourne versus Sydney. I think the winner of this makes the granny because they'll wrap around and get the softer side of the draw. Not quite sure what he means by wrap around in that context. The loser usually wraps around and plays the winner of Geelong and Collingwood. So there's obviously a parallel universe where.
But what's the difference if we play the winner of if the winner of Collingwood Geelong
it is
the
softer.
Loser of Collingwood Geelong?
It is better because it means that we on seeding, if it was tennis, that we won't meet the number one seed until the final, which is Geelong, right? So it does make a lot of sense. But where it gets a bit
if Collingwood win this week?
Wonky is that he has no idea about this match because he believes this is absolutely a 50-50 game between Melbourne and Sydney, which is a complete nonsense. But if you believe in what David King says and you are a punter, jump on the Swans right now because Melbourne are $1.40 to win this game and the Swans are $2.70. So if you do agree with David King, it's a 50-50 game, then jump all over it. But it's just not. But he does make the good point, and that's despite the fact that you've got an easier path to the grand final. But it is definitely an easier path to a grand final. And it goes back to this discussion about the disadvantage of finishing top as opposed to finishing second in this first week because one plays 4, 2 plays 3. and then the loser. How does that work? You get potentially a tougher game for the Geelong next week than Melbourne next week. In this example, it works out exactly like that. That's statistically, the team finishing top doesn't win very often, and that's been put forward as one of the potential reasons.
So who's winning this week, Geelong, Collingwood?
I think we'll see. I think Geelong will flog Collingwood, and I think Melbourne will flog Sydney. That's how I think it'll go the first week.
Well, there are a couple other games you said. Brisbane will win. Who's winning Bulldogs, Freo?
I think Freo.
George?
Yep. Agreed. Yep.
And Geelong, Collingwood?
No, that's too hard because I hate Collingwood. they're playing well.
Does that
but
mean you
I
think they're going to win, or you think they're going to
Well,
lose?
I think this is going to be a big test of the Collingwood theory as they move into finals. Have they got the game capabilities and the game plans and the style of playing to win finals? I think we're going to find out this week.
We'll see.
Absolutely, and I think this will be the big reason I think that will flog Sydney and Geelong will flog Cats is that both Melbourne and Geelong are now at our optimal peak. We're ready now to go physically. Where Pies Pies have been up for a long time. So are the Swans, and so they both. Teams, Swans and Pies, are about to hit teams at their physical peak. That just hasn't happened. They haven't played any team like the Cats and Geelong, either team. Sorry, the Cats and the D's, either team. And I think we'll see that very clearly on the weekend.
Well, I think we're going to park the Wheelo's premiership metrics just in terms of our timing, and let's hope we win this week. Then we can do our review of the game.
I want to come to it because I've done all my work, Willow.
I know.
I've done it, and it's fascinating. It really is fascinating bit of work. So
I know, and I wanted to. We're not gonna let it go. We will talk about it. Hopefully, we win, so we have that extra week off, and we could do a preview show like we're doing now, and then we can do that. And I'll try to cut down all the questions.
That would be really good.
And I wanted to see if I can get Wheelo on and talk to him about it. I think that'll be fascinating. But let's go talk about Casey. The Casey Demons booked a place in the VFL preliminary final with an emphatic 47-point win over the Sydney Swans. The Demons had a 17-point lead at halftime, and after the main break, they extended that lead by 6 goals, setting up the easy kill. Mitch Brown kicked 5 goals. Luke Dunstan had 38 disposals and kicked 2 goals. And in his return to footy after almost 100 days on the sidelines, Tom McDonald kicked 1 goal, 1 from 2 marks and 11 disposals. Now, before George or Big Man, I can't remember who's going to talk about it, give their thoughts on the match and who played well, let's not bury the lead. We all want to know about Tom McDonald. It's time for back-to-back. Says, I won't be able to listen live tonight, but I am looking forward to listening to the whole pod tomorrow as I'm a captive audience from Melbourne to, you guessed it, where else for a D supporter but Mount Buller. But I assure you I will be back in Melbourne in time for Friday's game. Having watched T-Mac on the weekend come back in and be pretty effective straight away, although a bit underdone, does anyone think he might be a sneaky chance to get into the team by the grand final, assuming we're there? Personally, I think it's really unfortunate that they have a bye this week, which I think probably rules him out as he won't get enough game time to sneak in if injuries open up a spot. If Ben Brown goes down, you'd have to consider it though, wouldn't you? What are your thoughts on T-Mac? It's great that they won. Probably a shame that they didn't win because then we could have had another game just selfishly for T-Mac to be able to see if he can get up. What do you think? Are we going to see T-Mac this year? Is he a break glass if we're desperate? What's happening?
Yeah, I think that's more the case at the moment. I think if you listen to his interview after the game, it's pretty obvious that he's not going to be available for the next game. He admitted himself he's got to spend more time at gym and training to be able to get up to the required fitness levels. This was just a first blow the cobwebs out sort of experience, making sure that his foot was capable, but he obviously hasn't had the loads imposed on him yet. I'm not worried about him playing games to get fitness because the sports scientist people are very good at getting people up to the required levels without having to kick a football around a field. But it was good to see him back. It's not. He might. Just depends on what happens in the next couple of weeks. with other players and things like that, there's a possibility, but it'd mean we'd have to restructure around the forward line. So we've been successful without him. I think he does provide a lot more to us than the other options we've got, particularly up the field. But really, it's really an internal matter to know how well he's progressed and whether they're willing to take the gamble in a couple of weeks' time if we're approaching a grand final.
Yeah, man.
It's interesting that bye week. Yeah, it's hard to see him. He looked like he not playing for 3 months.
Yeah.
But he did a number of things that were structurally important in that game, I thought. Like he brought the ball to ground, he worked up the ground, he did all of the things that he does in the seniors. I heard that interview after the game too, George. It was a terrific interview. He was so honest, wasn't he? But there's time. There's 3-4 weeks. To me, it depends a little bit on the matchup and who we play. Yeah. Because I wouldn't rule it out completely, absolutely, because I think that it means that we've got that option of stretching a defence. I think Goody has shown his hand that he's prepared to make some big calls on selection close to or roundabout finals. So I was just going to say, Andy, that one of the interesting discussions during the week that comes up every year is this bye before the finals start, and the disadvantage that it is for the teams playing in the qualifying final, which is hard to argue with the stats in terms of the drop-off of performance by the qualifying finalists.
Did it hurt us last year? We didn't have the pre-finals bye, but we had that final got bye, and we had the same thing, but later on.
But it's almost not comparable last year because there wasn't a pre-finals bye.
There was
bye before the... But what was interesting, though, is, and it relates to T-Mac and whether he's going to get up, is because Melbourne, unlike other teams seemingly, is under Burgess and now under Griffith, is that we have a full hit-out in that off week. So we had a full hit-out last week. I don't know if it was a full match, but it was certainly match-like conditions with umpires and, by all accounts, players cracking in that he played in, and he'll do that again if we win this week and there's a week between them and the prelim. They'll have another full hit-out. So he will get a full hit-out again before potential prelim. So, I don't. He's definitely won't be playing this week, will he? So it'll be, the prelim potentially.
Yep. George, other Casey standouts from the game.
The thing that stood out for me in this Casey game was, in a way, Mitch Brown, in the sense that he is a very good VFL player.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And who kicks five goals, and it shows the level that other contenders in our side have got to reach to be able to get to the AFL level. At least you've got to be doing as well as what Mitch Brown was doing. That some of his leading was just leading into space, and I'm particularly impressed when T-Mac kicked an absolute ripper to him on the lead. He took it at full stretch, and you go, Sam Wiedemann and Jacob Van Rooyen, that's what you've got to do. That's what you've got to do all the time. That's where you've got to reach. And Mitch Brown can barely get an opportunity to play at the senior level. So
took a nice hanger too, didn't he?
The
classic VFL hanger where he had room to run at the contest. And
So that was what really stood out for me. I was really impressed with the progression of people like Woden in the game. He's come from sort of a fringe type player that you hope might turn out all right to someone who you think now is definitely going to turn out all right, and he will be a senior level player for us in the future. He's got that talent. He looks and plays like his old man did. Van Rooyen is similar. He's got all those moves, even when he gets thrown into the ruck for short periods of time. I just love his second efforts.
Excitement machine, isn't it?
Yes, not just kicking goals, not just taking marks. He was on the ground on his knees trying to scrap while he was in the ruck position. You've got to put in all the time at this level. Similar sort of concepts that Dunstan gets, 38 possessions or something? Yeah, something ridiculous, and he can't get and he can't get a run in the side. that's the level that you've got to get to, just to be knocking on the doors of the Melbourne Football Club senior side at the moment. So it's good to have all these younger players seeing what's required. We were completely dominant in the game, if the truth be known.
Our system looked fantastic, though, didn't it? Really, it's the most all season, most similar to our senior team, the way that they moved the ball. And it wasn't like the standout player. I mean, Dunstan was a standout player in terms of his numbers. I thought he used the ball really well, which has been my knock on him. But it was really a win for the system, really, in some respects, because it wasn't as if there were massive standouts. I thought Rosman had a great second half, and I wondered whether maybe he showed enough maybe to get a rookie contract for next year, or because I thought his second half was terrific. Laurie was quiet, I thought.
He wasn't being played in the midfield. I think that was the problem when they moved Munro back into the side that pushed Laurie out.
Where to? I wasn't really sure where he was.
I didn't see a lot of him at all during the game to know where he was. Yeah.
The one negative it's probably a bit tough to be honest, but if I was to pick a negative, it was Tomlinson. I just thought to myself, there were a couple of times where it wasn't really an attitude, but where he just didn't move. His lateral movements not got back to where it was, and he was never laterally brilliant. So it just made me wonder, watching him, where he sits at the club in terms of, you've got Howes down there, you've got Disco Turner. Yeah. Turner's almost in front of Tomlinson. I hate to say it.
Yeah, I think so as well, and I think there's more upside with Turner.
Yeah. So I wonder whether, for a fella who's obviously ultra competitive, that he might be someone who looks for another opportunity as a defender at another club.
Yeah. The other interesting one for me was Joel Smith.
I thought he played all right.
He played all right, and then he dropped away for a long period of time as well. He did some smart things, and then he did some silly things. It sort of seems to be a repeat of Joel Smith's career so far. I'd like to see him cement a more long-term position in the forward line. I think he's got far more upside in the forward line.
Yeah, I think so.
The defence.
Absolutely.
So, given that he's been pushed around the last couple of years, and they've tried him down the back, and then he's got injured again. They've just re-signed him for another 2 years, so that's good. Here's the opportunity to build some time in the forward half, which I think he really needs, and hopefully his body holds up in the meantime.
And we should give credit where it's due. I thought Weed had a really good game in the rucked well, played competitively, like in terms of his effort and intensity. He's a beautiful field kick when he's got space. He's good technique. But the other thought I had about Smith was that potentially if we did lose Jackson, or even if Jackson's in the team, is that I wonder whether Smith could be like a second ruckman style in the way Silvani is. He's got the leap for it. But Wiedemann could definitely play that second ruck role to a degree, I think.
All right, let's move on to ins and outs. Lefty says, reports were that Track left the training track on the weekend with a calf complaint. The club insists that he will be fine to line up against the Swans. Someone in the thread about his injury claims that Tony Jones reported that Track cancelled his media commitments for today. If Track fails to prove his fitness for Friday, who comes in to replace him? Well, it seems like Dunstan would be the guy that comes in, but it's not really a like for like. But
or Jordan.
Or Jordan.
He was interviewed with a doorstop going into Casey today before a training session, and basically said he's playing.
Well, the club claimed that too. So
yeah. Although they then posted some. I think it must have been an Instagram picture of him having some sort of treatment, which is not surprising. You'd think they'd be treating it if he's got a complaint.
Yeah,
but it's a question of whether he's up to it. And he seemed to be quite confident that he was going to be playing on Friday, and I suspect he will be.
I think his quote was, "It's just a flesh wound."
Oh well, there he's got that. That Therabody. He's got one of those things that looks like what people wear, like those inflatable things for a broken leg type of thing. So he's got this thing wrapped around his leg with a machine attached to it. So I'm sure it's doing some type of compression to his calf or leg. I don't know. But earlier in the year, we did see him with something on his knee, and that seemed to have done the trick. So I'm sure they know what they're doing. D Old Fart wants to know about Salem, saying, assuming Salo is fit, can we fit both him and Bowser into the team? They both add value with their ball use. Salo's should be fit to come in. How can you not? How can you not have him in?
He comes in, doesn't he?
Yeah,
I think Bowie goes out. And who do you put in for Jordan? Andy, you didn't answer that before.
Well,
so you reckon Jordan comes back?
I didn't say he would come back in. It was George. I don't think he will come in.
Well, I think based on our previous history, we've got no idea about what the selections are going to be.
Well,
the danger is that Bin Man's going to have to do a nudie run at some stage. So.
Well, Harms is back, so
yeah.
My next point was that because we've been so accurate this year with changes, it's time to put your money where your mouth is. But before we do that, we did have a question from Doug Reamer that came in late in the thread. He said, in my opinion, he's tagged you, Bin Man. He said, at Bin Man, in my opinion, I think the only chance T-Mac has of coming back in is if, God forbid, we lose on Friday night and we're exposed for not having a second traditional key forward. He would come in for a semi-final. My question, who will be the Medi sub on Friday, as we have the entire list to pick from as Casey aren't playing? So, as well as picking ins and out, who's going to be Medi sub?
Well, Jordan will be the Medi sub. Poor bugger.
George?
There you go.
He'd be the next viable option, I would think. So,
but is that what you're doing, or are you picking for a particular position, maybe some more zip?
It's got to be. They've played Jordan. I mean, he's a professional Medi subber.
Yeah.
So
him and Sparrow.
Half of his AFL career has been as a Medi sub.
I mean,
him in Bedford.
Your heart would go out for him if that's the case. If he do get to a granny and he's Medi sub again.
Well, it's really hard to see. I mean, in all seriousness, Salem's got to come back in. Well, will come back in. Yep. Bowie is the logical one to go out. And I unless Bowie becomes the Medi sub, but he's not probably flexible enough in the positions he can play. So Jordan is like Brayshaw. He can play half-back flank. He can go up forward if need be. He can go on ball. He can play the wing role. He's dead unlucky not to be in that side. If he's not best 22, I mean he's best 22.2 at the moment. So he's he probably deserves to be Medi sub apart from his flexibility that he offers in that spot.
All right, let's move on. We'll do this as quickly as we can, George. Our women got a little bit of revenge back for our defeat in last year's grand final against a team that has dominated us for the last few years. The Demons dominated the scoreboard in this round, and had they kicked a little straighter, they would have won by a larger margin than the 18 points that they ran our winners by. West, Paxman, Purcell and Hall were standouts for the Ds. George, your thoughts on the match out at Glenelg?
Yeah, I was really worried about this game because Adelaide didn't lose a lot of players in the draft period. I think there was only 2, maybe 3 left the club. Previous to that, of course, they were basically the South Australian women's side. That Adelaide, particularly in the grand final, simply outmuscled us and overpowered us. It was as simple as that. They are very fit, very strong girls, and I was worried that since that was only a couple of months ago, the same thing had happened in this game. And I was really surprised, particularly in the first quarter, because Adelaide came out so strongly and so physically against us. I thought we would wilt, and we gave it back to them.
Yep.
It was just extraordinary. The Liv Purcell and Eliza West have been, because Purcell, I think only played 1 or 2 games last season because she was coming back from injury, and Eliza West was only in her first season coming from the VFL. they have really stepped up in a big way, and all of a sudden that means you've got two strong midfielders and
super strong,
Yeah.
smart too.
Yeah,
smart.
and
Purcell's so classy, isn't she?
Yeah, fantastic. And what it means is that although we experimented, meant we could move Karen Paxman more to the outside. You've got three powerhouses sitting in around the middle. Tyler Hanks was in and under everything again. She's another strong inside mid, and it just creates opportunities up the field. I thought it was really interesting that they moved Taylor Harris into the rucking role. Moved and
got away from defence and out to space and
made full use of her her strength and capabilities up the field. And the other thing that I've noticed in this game is we're developing, and it's probably across the whole women's competition. It's more kicking now. Previous seasons, it was always handball and short chips and things like that. Now we've got the players like Paxman can kick 50 metres.
I was about to say that's the thing about having her out in space is to get good depth with her kicking. Makes a big difference in AFLW, doesn't it?
Yeah, Taylor Harris can kick 50 metres, and the real surprise to me was Talia Gillard down back. She's about 9 foot tall,
which is big girl,
which was remarkable, and she kicks 50 and 60 metres.
Yeah, it makes you're right. That's a good point. Yeah. But the other thing, Joy, like they didn't get rid of they reduced their handball, but they're playing a similar style. Well, not. It's some similarities to the way Pies like to use the corridor and using, but still getting territory forward. Yep. So I think it was watching that game actually was really occurred to me. It's like the territory is even more important in AFLW, isn't it? It's like that's why. So if you can kick 60 metres down the field, that's massive. Yeah,
and the other thing about the longer kicking is the girls, unfortunately, are still not very good at marking. So if you kick 60 metres, it's very likely to come to ground and stay where it's
not going to intercept as often. And
they haven't got the opportunity. Down back, Maddie Gay and Libby Birch were just rocks in the defence. I lost track of the number of times that Libby Birch saved us on against a very, very strong side. Hatchard was a great player.
Isn't she, Hatchard?
You just don't want to give her any space or any room. There were some quiet games from Bannon and who else?
Zanker, I didn't think.
And Zanker was very quiet. Popped up when she needed to kick a goal for us, but she's been very quiet in the last.
She didn't have a great last third of the season last year either. I didn't think.
Yeah, but it was a great start. It shows that we've addressed a few of the problems that we had to get us to that next level. I think we'll steamroll a lot of clubs this year, and it'll be we'll be in a similar position to what Adelaide were last year. And now we've got Adelaide out of the way. I don't know that there's any other clubs that are going to worry us, quite frankly.
The real positive sign for me, George, was that we, exactly as you said, we scored because against the last 3 times we played, the last 2 times at least we've played the Crows, is that they've not allowed us to score anything. We just haven't been able to get into the game with their physical strength and their defense, but they were much better with their ball movement and they were still being aggressive with their kicks. And I thought, that came off. The thing that I thought was Purcell was amazing, I thought. I thought I haven't seen a player improve at any level as much as West did from season to season. It's only a 4-month break between the two, but suddenly she can kick reasonably well. Not, she's coming off a pretty low base, but she was a pretty good handballer last season. But her handball in tight, I thought, was just sensational. So Purcell and West, they make such a big difference at all levels of contested ball. I mean, it's such a contested game, AFLW. In many ways, it's going to, a lot of games are going to swing on the contest. So to have Purcell and West in there winning those hard balls and being able to distribute properly, because Purcell's got skills by foot and hand, I think that's massive for the team.
Oh, sorry, I had myself on mute. Absolutely massive. I think we're going to leave it there, guys.
Don't Don't forget the girls are playing
I was
before
just
the
about
game.
to say that.
Right? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Don't forget to get down to the.
What time does that start, that game?
Well, that's
5.
where George might be
5.
able to help. Get down at 5 o'clock or a bit after that to watch the girls before our next game, which is this Friday night at the MCG. So make sure you've got your tickets. You get out there, you cheer loudly because I want to win this game.
What's your prediction, Andy? Do you think we'll win?
I think. I'm confident that we can win, but I have this little thing called the MFC.
Confident that we can win.
Yeah, I am.
George, we're going to win.
That's as good as we get out of Andy episode. We are definitely going to win.
Yeah, we're going to win.
Win
easily.
That's yes. Let's do that. But anyone who, if you're listening to this live, if you're listening to this now, after the show, I will be playing. Whispering Jack and I interviewed Ian Munro about his book, which is called Between the Flags. It's sort of chronicles the in between our 1964 flag and the most recent flag that we won last year. And if anyone's a Demon fan, which you all are, it's a good listen. So take a listen. I'm going to play it after this. If you are listening to this later on, you can listen to whichever podcast platform you're listening to it on. It's the podcast before this one. It's called Ian Munro Interview. So give that a listen if you got a spare hour or so. It's a very good conversation. Thank you to Kongwaka. Thank you to Demo Saw, Lazy, Watson 11, D-Knox, Singer, CHF, Bigfoot, Defense, D's Nuts, Junior Mac, Demonized, Rhino, D-Nose, Buck Naked, El Diablo 14, Lefty Stew, Wheelo Ratings. We'll get to your thing soon. It's time. Doug Reamer, Spargonicus, CYB. Thank you to my co-host, George and B-Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. And we'll be back next week, hopefully discussing a fantastic, famous victory at the MCG. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons.